Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Tuesday topic. Today's topic is Ethically Speaking Peer Review. It's a part of our ongoing Ethically Speaking series about responsible conduct of research. So without further ado, let me throw it over to Dr. Roseanne DiMaria Galili, who is our Senior Associate Dean for Research, to introduce the panel and herself, and take it away.
Thanks, Darren. Thanks, everyone, for coming out today for our Spring Ethically Speaking series. Next slide, please. So today, we are here to talk about our RCR, Responsible Conduct of Research. And as we all know, it's sometimes used interchangeably with research integrity. And we put this series together based on the NIH's mandate that we should have continuing ongoing training in RCR, especially for faculty, postdocs, and doctoral students. So next slide, please. Oh, I think we jumped ahead one too many. Okay. And what is responsible conduct of research? It's the practice of scientific integrity, or the practice of scientific investigation with integrity. And what we are really trying to do is to touch on all aspects of the recommended RCR topics through the series of these quarterly Tuesday topic meetings. Next slide, please. So what we will be addressing today is publication and peer review. And that's one of the NIH topics to address and the ethical responsibilities regarding peer publication and peer review. And to lead us in the discussion is Dr. Connie Perry, and Zach Hathaway will be assisting as we move forward. So there you go, Connie, take it away.
Okay, all right. So I'm not sure why NIH has paired these two things, but they probably because, in order to publish, you have to go through the peer review process. So we're going to do a quick thing on the ethics of publication. I'm open to any questions on that. And then more of a focus on peer review, which includes not just publication, but also things like grant review and reviewing colleagues for promotion and that kind of thing. But let's start with publication. So NIH talks about publication is related to opportunities for advancement. Often people are, so there's almost an inherent conflict of interest in that, you're not simply publishing because you want this information out in the public sphere, but you're also publishing in order to add it to your collection of work, right? And so that the idea is to keep that balance of, yes, you ought to be proud of your accomplishments, but the main driver should always be, or that you should always have in your head the idea of publishing to advance the field, right? So it's important for conveying findings to the scientific community that can be used for other publications that can advance science and society. So not just advancing your personal, goals and achievements, but more so to advance science and the well-being of society. Then it requires opportunities for validation. So we do look at, our paper is reliable, and one of the ways that we do we check for this is replication. So in order for a study to be replicated, you need to include the information that is needed in that study. And this is a little tricky, and it also goes in with the idea of sharing, but NIH has repeated that sharing is an important value in research. So, the idea is that publications should include all the information that is needed, such as the methods, the data, the materials, in order to validate and reproduce results. Now, you're not going to publish all of your raw data. However, the publication provides a mechanism for people that if they want to, let's say have a question about your study methods and they need access to the data, they can contact you as the senior author. And you can look at the methods and such. In very competitive areas, again, this can, some people might say, well, you got to keep one key thing out of the publication. But again, then that undermines the purpose of science, which is, to advance knowledge. So you have to keep in mind, yes, there is this, constant jockeying for, what's good for me, what I need out of this process, why I'm doing this work, or one of the reasons why. But keep in mind the main goal, which is the trying to advance our level of knowledge. And then we talk about policy adherence. Ethics is a lot about, the fact that we're not isolated individuals working in a vacuum, right? So we have to interact with other people, and everyone has their own way of doing things and thinking about things and such. And so policy is a way to, okay, there are certain common values that we have, and how do we create a mechanism to encourage people to follow those values? Because most people follow the basic research ethics values voluntarily, but not everybody does. But also, some people will make errors or choose methods that, through no fault of their own, don't lead to or can create obstacles to good research. So the policies help everybody understand what's expected, and help resolve misunderstandings and promote social organization of the field. So journals have policies concerning, as we've mentioned in other talks, authorship, sharing, conflict of interest disclosures, and protections against misconduct that have to be adhered to. And so that's why if you get a paper accepted, then you have to sign a number of forms saying that you've agreed to these different things. So it's always useful to read those to make sure that that none of the policies have changed since you last paid attention to them, and keep copies of them. All right, next slide, please. All right, so here's the peer review process. So peer review, does someone want to tell me what peer review is and what its purpose?
I can take a stab at it.
Sure.
Like when you're trying to publish an article or a manuscript, you submit it to a journal, and then the journal sends it out to experts in the field for reviewing. And then based on their comments and feedback, we do revisions, or, the manuscript also might not be accepted, or they might just ask us to revise and then resubmit.
Right. Right. And why have they done this? Why did they create this kind of process?
Yeah, so I believe it is to evaluate the quality of the material that you're submitting, like whether it is ready for scientific dissemination or something, and it's being evaluated by experts in the field. So they are our peers. So.
Yeah, that's the idea, to try to promote reliability throughout the process of publication, and to distinguish these journals from, say, a magazine, or a website or a blog, right? So so there are certain ethical responsibilities for peer review, and these responsibilities are on both the side of the peer reviewers, the editor or editorial process, and the authors, right? But they include a number of things, such as maintaining confidentiality, because you're submitting something that you haven't generally made public. Maybe you've given a talk or two, but for the most part, it's pretty it's a surprise, right? And you need some assurance that people are not going to take your study and then claim it as their own, right? And this is very important in because in most areas, the prize goes to the person who proved it for who had the first successful. And so and the best reviewers are the people that are working in your area and that know your material, right? So they're the ones with the greatest conflict of interest. That's that earlier thing on publication and that distinction. So we need confidentiality in there, and sometimes that I've reviewed papers that I'm like, oh, we're talking in class about this next week. This is perfect. I would, now I can't share it with my students, right? It would be perfect, yeah, right? And things like that. Anyway, and then you have conflicts of interest, which connect, all of these things are interconnected. We talk about them as if they're separate, just for clarification, but they're not. And giving constructive criticism. I got a paper, and the editor actually called me up and he's like, I'm sorry for the delay, but your paper I'm going to send it out to a third reviewer. Right. And it's, I'm a bioethicist, so, I publish a lot on very controversial issues. And this was animal experimentation. Right. And so we had one reviewer said it was the best thing since sliced bread. Right. And the other, which I knew was not the case. Right. And then the other reviewer said it wasn't worth the paper it was written on. Right. And so the editor is like, okay, this is, there's a problem with it. And so he sent it out to a third reviewer. This is an editor that was following good editorial practice, right? So that if you you want individuals that identify, whether the peer review process is functioning well and whether people are able to give constructive criticism that moves to improve the publication, as opposed to personal opinions and that kind of thing. So, and you also want people to be honest about whether or not they have the time to do the reviews, and can actually step back and give fair and unbiased analyses, right? Because just because you're very, you could be very wedded to specific methods, and think that other methodologies to study a question or an issue are inferior. But you need to, if you're going to agree to review someone using those other methodologies, you need to step back and consider whether or not you can give an unbiased review, and be competent. Don't get so excited that someone from science has asked you to peer review a paper, for example, that you say yes without really assessing whether you're the right person to do this, whether you have the knowledge base. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so the one big question is where to publish. So you might want, that high impact factor. And I know, for me, like, I'm like, people are like, oh yeah, what's the impact factor? Blah, blah. That's less important as to who is your audience. You want a good quality journal, but you also want a journal that the audience that you intend to view this is going to read the material. So you wouldn't, if you're doing something and you want it read, so I give my example for bioethics. There are some medical journals that publish a lot of bioethics work, but if my main focus is on, say, clinical ethics and the way clinical ethicists should function, then that's probably, the New England Journal of Medicine is probably not the best place for me to publish that paper. And so I should go to maybe the Journal of Clinical Ethics, right? All right. Next slide, please. Then there are predatory journals, how many of you have gotten one of those emails? Like, oh, congratulations. We would love for you to publish, or we would love for you to fly to, Beijing and present. And, if you're tired, you just got done from, teaching 2 back-to-back classes, and you open this up and you're like, oh, and there's a little glee, and then you're like, oh no. Yeah. So there are journals out there where you can pay and you can almost guarantee a publication. And that's but that's, again, going back to first, how do you want your material out there? And also, you have to think about, remember, if the goal is getting the knowledge out and having it assessed by other people with your expertise, that's the predatory journals are not the place to go. And direct to, say, the Inquirer or, publishing on the web is not the place to go.
Add something to that, Connie?
Yes.
Also, I think with a lot of predatory journals, another reason for not publishing in them is that they're not always indexed into PubMed. So if people are doing a literature search, and if you want your work to be found during doing a good lit review, it's not going to show up. So there's certain criteria in order to get indexed into what Index Medicus, right?
Right.
For journals. So that's something really to be concerned about.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a excellent point. And then that goes back to the idea that other people in the field are not going to be able to access it because they're going to do that PubMed search and your work is not going to show up. Any other comments on this? Can I have the next slide, please? All right, and this is the last thing, was salami slicing. So everybody wants, multiple publications, and honestly, if you did a multi-year study, with working with a number of other people, you probably, it probably needs to be split into multiple publications because you can't cover the whole thing adequately in one publication. But this idea of publishing into the least publishable unit, it becomes problematic, and really devolves into, at best, repetitive publishing. But again, going back to what are you trying to do? Well, you're trying to address a specific issue. And if you slice it down into these tiny little units, it's hard for people to understand the whole picture. And so, and this does end up coming out, in reviews when people are looking at your publications. So just keep in mind that each publication should make a distinct and substantial contribution to the field. And if you're wondering, if this is okay, it's fine to ask another colleague, or it should be something that those people, the people that you have working on the project, should be discussing, what is a reasonable way to publish the work. Any questions on this?
I do have a follow-up question on this. So this is more like new faculty. I mean, I know that at some point in time, I'm going to have multiple students in my lab, and some of them might be just working on the same study. So what is a good practice? Like, should it be when the project starts, like making it very clear that this is your research question and this is your research question? Like, what are some good practices? If you could share that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think, that's really very important, because when we work with students, or undergraduate students, graduate students, doctoral students on research, and I always think about what's the goal for this research study and what is it that I can carve out for that individual student that they can make their own contribution. And if they want to take the lead on moving that forward into a presentation or a publication. So I typically look at what secondary data analysis that I can give them that doesn't take away from the major aims of the study, because you really want to retain the right to publish the primary aims of any of your research work, right? So if there's a secondary analysis or another burning question that you may have that, the primary aims didn't address, I think that is appropriate to carve out for students, or if it's a methods piece, right? Or if you're trying to establish the reliability and validity of a certain instrument or metric, that could be something, a lot of times we collect more data than we need. So you could have collected open-ended questions, and you might need someone to do a thematic analysis. Or looking at Justine, I don't even know if I'm saying that term correctly, but to more of a qualitative approach. So I think there's different, it all depends. I think it depends, but I would never give away my primary aims, right, to a student or to anyone, because that's your work that you're
Roseanne,
trying.
that's very helpful. I just want to circle back to publishing the primary aims, like the findings from the primary aims. So are you the first author on that, or are you the last author on that? Like, is there I don't know if there's a rule of thumb or something.
That's so discipline specific. So in some disciplines, so let me put it, if it's your project and you are the PI on the grant, I think it's appropriate, depending on who else is part of it, that if you're the one taking the lead and certainly meeting the requirements to be first author on a publication, then you should be the first author. I think in terms of tenure or promotion, what people typically look at is whether or not you're the first author or the last author. And the last author usually means senior author, right? So someone who's more senior, maybe supervising the work. So that's, how I would, if it was your dissertation or your study that you received funding for, that's how I think you should be the PI on that. First author. Anybody else have thoughts about that?
Well, I think it's important to have conversations with the people on the project at the beginning of the project. And then if anything, major happens and say someone, is really taking over more of a lead role in a side aim, and you discuss it again. And because students don't understand authorship. And it's important. The other thing is, again, like reading for journals, different journals may have different rules for order of authorship as well. So just understanding, and mostly it is discipline specific, but
and I also know that some labs, like some big labs, and this is maybe a very biomedical approach or basic science approach, that everyone that's part of that lab gets put on a publication. But I think with the new COPE authorship guidelines, that's really a no-no, because you really have to demonstrate that you've contributed to the work, not that just because you're all part of that lab. If other people have contributed to the manuscript, then I think it's appropriate to include the whole lab on a manuscript. But some journals now are requiring a statement in terms of what everybody contributed to that. And just because you were collecting data as like a research assistant collecting data on a project, that doesn't necessarily entitle you to be co-author on a manuscript. So I don't know, Justine, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I think the important piece is that if it's a secondary analysis, then it's not a problem because it's your own aim. What we're seeing in the qualitative world, and we did a guest editorial not too long ago on salami slicing, is that somebody's taking their aim And then they're trying to publish each themes. Let's say you have 3 themes, each theme has its own paper. And then that reduces the work. And there's a lot of ethics behind that because you're not talking about the full voice of the participants and everything they had to say. So, the same thing with qualitative. If you do a secondary analysis, it's very different than trying to get 3 pubs out of one research aim.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I think sometimes I know we have doctoral students and postdocs on a good rule of thumb for any dissertation is typically you could get up maybe, depending on what the dissertation is, up to 3 papers out of a dissertation. Some students might do a systematic review, from a lit review perspective, and that goes with anyone in terms of what you're publishing. One could be a methods paper or something unique about the methods or design, and then, your aims. So one, depending on what's involved with each aim of the study, you can maybe get 1 or 2 papers out. So,
yeah. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so let's switch to peer review. There are generally 3 different approaches to peer review. There's a single blind, so that's where the author is not aware of who the reviewers are, but the reviewers know who the author is. There's double blind, which is where I think this is the one I'm most familiar with, where neither the author nor the reviewers know the names. So all unique, identifiers are removed. And then there's open review. Open review is actually what here at Drexel on the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee we use for peer reviews. And that's because the peer review process is designed to help, to help the investigator, improve the protocol so that it will have as smooth a review process as possible. And so you're trying to anticipate. And so open review is a good review method for that. Because it enables the primary reviewer to talk directly with the PI, and if the issue is one of statistics, they can talk to the statistician, and if it's an animal welfare, veterinary medicine kind of thing, they can talk to the veterinarian, and it works well. But the other 2, and I'm not a big fan of the single blind, but it is there.
yeah.
Right.
I've had, for one professional association that I'm affiliated with, they have 2 journals. One journal is single blind and the other journal is double blind. And so for the single blind, I get to see who the authors are and where they're from. And that could sometimes generate bias, right? When you're reviewing. Right. And then for the other journal, it's totally double blind. I have no idea who the authors are. And I prefer that approach. Open review, when I get invitations, some journals ask me to review, and they say it's an open review, that they're going to publish my name, that I reviewed the manuscript, and my feedback. I won't review for those journals because I feel that it biases me to be affiliated with a journal article that, or it's going to bias my review, because people, not only will my reviews are going to be published, and so that could set people up for, if I don't give a good review, then that could bias what people say about me in the future. So I don't know. I personally don't do open reviews.
No,
so.
I also agree. It's really, it's difficult. I did an open review twice on, well, these are books, but I remember when I really didn't like the book, and I didn't think it was, the arguments were strong, and but I knew that the author was very strong, was very well known, and had a history of going after people that gave her bad reviews. And so I had to, what I actually did was I contacted my dissertation director for advice on how to, how to do the review honestly, and yet, and yet avoid, try to avoid the backlash. And I think it worked, but it's can be tricky. That's why I'm a fan of the double blind review. On the other hand, I do see how there are some people that do peer reviews and they show, it's the review process is not about mercy, but it is about professionalism and being constructive. And so, being nasty or, making, if you're going to provide a serious critique on someone, you better provide reasons. And I think sometimes, there can be some bullying that comes out of the double blind.
Maybe, I don't know. I'm looking at the time.
Yeah, we should probably go to the next slide. Yeah. Okay. So next slide, please. Okay. So, so the ethics of peer review, just as we've discussed. So, I added, ethics, ethical values. So honesty and justice. So just like anything else with research, you always want to be honest and in what you're presenting. So do a fair, unbiased review, honest communication with the editor or the agency, whether it's NIH, NSF, or whatever. Disclose any conflict of interest or commitment. And this could be something as simple as I just don't have time right now. I would love to do this, but I don't have time. And follow the parameters of the journal. So, if the journal is, say, I'm thinking like the Hastings Center report is designed so that it's supposed to be written at a lay level. So don't make suggestions about more profession specific language if the journal is supposed to be written so that people from multiple professions can read it. That kind of thing. Professionalism. Don't agree to things that are outside your level of competence or expertise. Be honest again about your ability to complete within the time parameters and provide constructive critique. How you can word things in ways that make it easier for people to follow what you're raising. And then if the author comes back with a good response, that they disagree because blah, 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 that's fine, because the point is not about your ego or their ego. The point is to get a better paper, right? And then confidentiality. Last but not least, don't disclose, don't use, don't take advantage of what's been given to you in confidence. and follow the agreed upon communication methods. Don't contact the author directly if this is a double-blind review, for example, that kind of thing. Next slide. All right. From the author side, you want to recognize that the comments that you're getting are supposedly being provided to you in good faith. So try to read them in that sense. It's always hurtful to read a criticism of something that you've been working on for possibly years, right? And you thought was ready to go out. But the goal is to improve the paper. So understand the process. Again, confidentiality. Don't make assumptions about who you think the reviewer is. Understand who you're supposed to be communicating with. If it's been a long time since you've gotten any response about the paper, and be transparent about any potential conflicts of interest, and follow authorship ethics. Next slide. All right, so now we have the case study. So here, Dr. E has received a request to review a paper from a high-impact cell biology journal. Dr. E reads the abstract and realizes that the topic of the paper is identical to one her lab is working on. What should Dr. E do?